Okay. What JCB and companies like that, and they all speak the same language, their claim is actually false, that they have no responsibility over what their clients do with their products. That is nonsense. They do have a responsibility for end-user compliance. And this compliance is first and foremost with international law. If you're knowingly selling to a client that is consistently abusing your product or service to commit international crimes, you're definitely guilty as a company. You cannot claim innocence in any reasonable court. So this argument has been argued so many times by companies, and they've always been refuted. They never get away with that. But what's missing is power. Those are companies, they rule the world. To make a company bow to pressure, you either have a lot of power to convince your city council to exclude that company, then you don't need to convince the company. They can say whatever they want. You have to convince the city council that they're lying, they're responsible for the crimes committed by their products. They know. It is documented by human rights organizations around the world that their bulldozers are being used to commit war crimes. So they know they have a responsibility to prevent, not to aid and assist the commission of those crimes, especially in a situation of heightened responsibility to do due diligence, as they use the language they use in the corporate world, business and human rights language in the United Nations. They have a responsibility for extra due diligence because it's a conflict zone, armed conflict zone. So they cannot claim innocence. They're guilty. But again, our job is not to convince companies. We never try to convince companies. As I said, we convince them by one language, money, and reputation, which is money. Make them lose contracts, then they understand. That's the only language. Logic does not have any meaning to them. Ethics is like Swahili or Chinese, whatever you're coming from. I mean, it doesn't mean anything to them. The only language they understand is money. But city councils understand. Trade unions understand. Institutions understand. That's whom we have to convince to stop using those companies if there are feasible alternatives. If there are no feasible alternatives, the only bulldozers you have in a village in the middle of nowhere, somewhere in the world, is from JCB. And you either don't do construction or you use it, you have to use it. Because even in the BDS movement, we always say, if the only medicine in the world is manufactured by an evil company and there's no alternative, and you're sick and you need medicine, use it. You can't boycott at the expense of your health, obviously. So that's our ethical principle. But those companies know what they're doing and they're all guilty. We just need much more power to force them to become less evil. I'm not hoping that they'll be angels, they won't, but less evil. On media, digital information, and how their surveillance industry, basically, and how social media, let's say now, as you said, it's not a conspiracy, that Facebook and others are involved in surveillance. I mean, it's known today how their data, our data that's being colonized, is used by certain companies, certain states, and so on. In the most banal way, just to sell you products. They need to know what you prefer and what you don't prefer so that they can advertise to you. Or they use your information in the most sinister ways against you to violate your rights. Either way, you're right, we need alternatives. And we were discussing this on the way here. How did US big tech colonize Europe like this? I mean, it's suddenly like Europe has no brains to develop a competitor to Amazon that does delivery and online shopping. It's not rocket science. Why can't Europe have its own? It's really strange. Why can't Europe develop any social media? Why is it just the US and some Chinese, but mainly the US dominance? Why is Microsoft dominating the world? Why is that? I mean, this colonization by a tiny, tiny number of American big tech that are extremely evil, involved in war crimes from Congo to Palestine to everywhere in the world. Why are we allowing them? So, what? Do we throw away all the technology and be cut off from everything? No, we can't. We can't. We have to work on alternatives and try to, in the meanwhile, pick the lesser evil. There's no other way. but to pick the lesser evil. In the BDS movement, we never promote the lesser evil, because we have to do research to make sure, let's say, a company is not involved in violating Palestinian rights, but we haven't done the research whether it's violating women's rights in Somalia, children's rights in India. We don't know. LGBT rights in God knows where. We don't know. And we cannot do this research, obviously. So we don't call for, oh, don't buy from X, buy from Y. We just say, don't buy from X. Do your research, find a better company, a less evil company. So in the world of computers, let's say, laptops, we're calling for boycotting HP, Dell, and Intel chips. Intel chips are in quite a few computers, less now than they were a few years ago. That doesn't make it very easy to buy a laptop. There are alternatives. We won't spell out what alternatives are there, but there are. So look for the lesser evil until a much more ethical alternative is viable. And we have to keep pushing that alternative to come through. On direct action, actually, you said several points. Let's try to separate them apart so that we analyze them right together. The BDS movement always calls for direct action. It always has done direct action, but always in a strategic way as part of an overall strategy. If a number of activists go out and just have no plan, they just know a company is guilty, and they just go and smash things at that company, and they get arrested. This happens, and it's very altruistic of them. They've done something against their own interest to stand in solidarity. But is it part of a bigger strategy? Was there a plan B? What if we get arrested? What's the plan? Have we done the training on what should be said and done to avoid the worst? If we go to court, what can we tell the judge? All of this doesn't come after. All of this comes before. If people are planning some action, let's call it violent action, smashing, let's call it violent action. In the BDS movement, we don't call for smashing. We call for occupying, maximum, breaking a lock maybe, but that's the maximum violence we will call for. Publicly, we don't call for any kind of violent action. We don't. We cannot endorse any kind of violent action. We call for non-violent action. But we always call for being strategic, doing your homework. So when BDS activists in the UK, for the first time anywhere, occupied an arms company in 2014, and a few weeks after that they did it in Brazil, same company, they had done their homework, consulted with lawyers and checked all the scenarios. What happens if they arrest us? What happens if they do this? And they had, with their lawyers, they studied all the alternatives. And what do they do in the action? Okay, they broke the lock, occupied the rooftop, and had banner drops, but that's it. They didn't smash anything. When the company pushed charges against them, they ended up in court. And the lawyers said, we want disclosure of what exactly is being manufactured in that factory. Where is it going? Who's using the products of that factory? And they asked the company that's pushing charges, give us the information to be able to defend our clients. The company never showed up. Who would? They dropped the case. Because the maximum charges against the activist was trespassing, aggravated trespassing, God knows those British laws. But anyway, I think something like aggravated trespassing. Wow. Thank you. On financial tech, it is very complex for everyone except those in that business. I'm an engineer, I don't understand much of that language. We're not experts in that field. In fact, we had a crash course to try to understand what it means during the genocide because of their role in financing the genocide, obviously. Luckily, a movement has grown of business people, even investors, who want to be more ethical. And this is a completely new thing for us. We're not used to organizing with investors. We organize with human rights activists, grassroots movements, and so on. But increasingly, we're seeing investors coming forward and saying, we want to help the movement. And it's not by donating to the movement. We're influential in our areas of influence, which is finance. So let us do what we can do best. Bring those financial institutions to be more ethical. They'll never be ethical, but everything is more or less relative. And that's very welcome. So that's kind of being done by groups that specialize in that. And that's best to be done outside the realm of BDS because they have the expertise. And no one can claim that we're influencing financial decisions with political discourse and so on. In the financial world, they like to keep it very, how shall I put it, pure financial. And of course, there's no such a thing. I mean, every financial decision is political. Ethics is in everything. But yet, we're giving that space so that they're not accused of being influenced. So that is happening increasingly. Whether this will translate into clear public discourse that lay people like us can understand, I think this will happen with time. But I want to mention the Intel story because I jumped over it very quickly. People might wonder, how would the BDS movement influence a giant like Intel? And I was telling my friend Frank here that, in fact, we issued the call for boycotting Intel. We were extremely lucky with the timing, pure luck. It's not like we were brilliant strategic, it was just luck. Intel had announced a $25 billion investment in Israel a few months into the genocide. So we had this fact sheet and we found out that the CEO of Intel is a Christian Zionist fanatic. And we looked into the investment and it looked completely ideological. Why would any company invest such a massive amount in a war zone? Forget ethics, forget international law. It's a war zone. It could be blown up in a second. Why would you do that? So we found out that he's a Christian Zionist, the CEO, and that he's very ideologically committed to Israel. So we wrote this fact sheet. We dug up every detail we could find, and we spread it. And it reached the top levels of Intel shareholders just at the right time when a revolution was brewing in Intel against the CEO for other issues. They had many other problems with his mismanagement. So this was perfect timing, and he was buried. He lost his job, basically. They canceled the investment. A few months later, he quit Intel. So never underestimate how we, mortal human rights activists, can influence big money and big tech, even financial tech. On the end of empire, we're good activists, we're not good prophets. We cannot predict, but we read history and we see trends. Ilan Pape, whom I've quoted, is a prominent Israeli historian, and he has said in a recent interview that there's no going back for Israel's regime of settler colonialism. It's doomed. He was in an interview with Mehdi Hassan, and he kept asking him, how did you reach this far-reaching conclusion? And he explained, as a historian, what trends he's seeing, and there's no going back. As a human rights activist who works on ethics in particular, I agree. There's no going back for settler colonialism in Palestine. It is, but it doesn't mean it's inevitable in the sense, let's sit back and relax. Divine intervention will bring it. It won't. It's us. We bring it. So that everyone can live in peace, justice, equal rights, and dignity, regardless of their identity. On AXA, and the limitations and challenges that we face in the BDS movement. Indeed, AXA, and there are many other examples that have shown the impact of the BDS movement. AXA is not yet off the hook, although we are getting reports that even their last investments in Israel's weapons companies, indirect investments, may have been shedded. They may have got rid of them. We're not sure yet. We're investigating that. We have to be very thorough before taking a company off the list. But they're clearly under pressure. And believe it or not, we do have people in high-up positions in many companies. And they're telling us, companies like Coca-Cola, McDonald's, HP, Intel are very pressured by BDS. They discuss BDS in their board meetings. And this is important because quite often, activists don't think we have an impact that high. Oh, those big corporations, they own the world. They couldn't care less. Oh, yes, they do. Because they care about one thing, the bottom line. So once I was asked, after Veolia divested, Veolia was the biggest company that we got, we forced to leave its illegal business in Israel. I was asked by a journalist, I think the New York Times, oh, we asked Veolia and they said it wasn't about BDS, it was a business decision. So I told the New York Times journalist then, now I don't speak to the New York Times, but then, I told them, duh, in colloquial American, of course it's business. That's what we do. You think we go teach Veolia about international law and the love of life? We teach them how we can affect their bottom line, their reputation. That's the only language corporations understand. And when they hurt enough, they quit. That's the formula. We know how to make companies quit. We're experts in making companies quit. And so that's how it goes. Now, as far as the challenges, there's so many. We're facing Israel. With the West, the entirety of the West supporting it. From the Irish government to the German, the absolute worst. To the US, complete partner in crime. So we're not facing, Palestinians in Gaza are not facing Israel. They're facing a whole empire, a whole Western empire with all its power, its military, propaganda, New York Times, CNN, BBC weapons, not just military weapons, not just digital weapons, AI, cloud services, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Oracle. It's not just that. It's the discourse weapons, the propaganda weapons as well, that dehumanize our children to make it easy to slaughter them silently while the media is calling it a conflict. Those are the challenges we face. But the counter-challenge that they have to deal with is that young people do not get their news from the BBC or the New York Times or the CNN. They watch social media and they hear Palestinians directly. And that's why from Japan to the US, from Sweden to South Africa, young people across the world are the ones leading the BDS activism on the ground and the ones forcing companies and institutions to drop their complicity. And that cannot be reversed. A whole generation was educated, educated about politics through the prism of Gaza. They were educated about the limits of liberal democracy in the West through the prism of Gaza. You cannot reverse that. Regarding the first question, maybe it's time to have a woman prime minister. I mean, yeah, good idea. Not that women are necessarily better, just remember Thatcher. We don't want a Thatcher. So, but it can't be worse. Let's put it that way. It can. But yes, I share the support for the Cork Film Festival for what they're doing, showing Palestinian films and so on, which is a great form of solidarity as well. In terms of what else can be done, and it's connected to the communities question, I think, it is everyone can do something in what I call their sphere of relative influence. Everyone is part of some collective. A school, a union, a community center, I don't know, a dance group, something. Everyone is part of something, and they can influence that something. And if they're not part of a union, get unionized. It's absolutely important for people to be in unions. No matter what you do in life, join a union. Because it's a more democratic oasis in a desert of free fall of liberal democracy and being replaced by neoliberalism. So I think it's very important to, within that sphere of influence, to push for what can be done, to push the limits of what can be done without unduly harming this collective. What I mean by that, if you're a union, and if you announce tomorrow a strike, a complete strike, in support of Palestinians, and there's no protection for you in the law, and the state definitely will not protect you, and the company that you're working for just fires all those workers and replaces them with others. Then those, let's say, 100 workers will have lost their jobs. They've shown solidarity with Palestine, but they've lost their jobs. What do we say about that? We don't expect those workers to do that for Palestine. We don't. We ask them to do whatever they can without unduly harming themselves. So what they can do should be pushed. Especially in parts of Ireland, a lot more can be done. This is Ireland. This is not the Netherlands. This is not, Germany, for God's sake. God-forsaken fascist Germany. This is Ireland. A lot can be done in Ireland. There's massive support. It's just how to channel this emotional support sometimes into actual policies. I mentioned ethical procurement policies. That is simple. It's really a no-brainer. What institution can resist a policy that says this city council, this church, this union will not procure from, will not contract companies involved in grave human rights violations anywhere, period. No mention of Palestine, nothing. No one can challenge this on the basis of discrimination. There's absolutely no challenge to such a policy. Why would any self-respecting institution not adopt this? Because there isn't enough push for them to adopt it. Even if you have city councillors that are really progressive, they need to see the warmth from the bottom up. They need to see the pressure. Sometimes politicians tell you, I agree with you, but make me do it. Push me, so that when the other side attacks me, I can say, look, the majority is asking me to do this, so make me do it. So I think we need to translate that. Ethical procurement policies, ethical investment policies. Your government is getting off the hook by refusing even to ban settlement goods and services. For how many years they've been dragging their feet? Forever. And now with a genocide, they give us the lip service. We support the Palestinians. Yeah, Israel's genocide. We'll go to the ICJ. How about don't go to anywhere? Just stop all Israeli products and services coming to this country. Stop the flights, illegal, immoral flights of US weapons to Israel through your ports and airports, and stop your investments from companies that are implicated in war crimes and crimes against humanity. We're not asking you for a favor. This is the minimum to fulfill your legal obligations under international law, especially the Genocide Convention. And there are enough Irish international law experts in this country to explain this to the thick government that you have. And organizing boycotts, obviously. A lot can be done at the level of organizing boycotts. Individual boycotts are nice to feel good. They're not effective. If it's collective, it's effective. If it's not collective, it's never effective. So if you organize many people in a local supermarket, we shall not go to the supermarket because you have those brands that are illegal and so on. Then the supermarket managers and owners will get the message. If it's just 5 of you boycotting a list of 250 companies, you feel good about yourself, but no one cares. Zero impact on anything. So we focus on targeted brands, and we all push against the same brands to teach those companies a lesson. On the last question, it's a tough one. What would I say to athletes or musicians that have trained for so long and now they can no longer participate in international championships because their state is committing war crimes, crimes against humanity, or genocide? Pressure your state to stop committing genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, and you yourself stop being part of genocide. I'll talk about my area of expertise, Israel. Israeli society, by and large, is genocidal. As I mentioned in the opening of my talk, it is not the fascist government alone. It is society writ large. As Orly Noy, the chairwoman of B'Tselem, said, the entire society needs what she called denazification. This is an extremely harsh term to use by any Israeli human rights figure like her. But she used it very deliberately because she understands it's in society. the academics and the techies and the students and the farmers and everyone, a huge percentage is supporting the genocide, supporting destroying Gaza and killing our children. So I have nothing to say to those people except do something to end your society's involvement in horrible crimes, and then the world will not boycott your country.